It's a pleasure to be introducing today Andy Summers. He's an associate professor of law at the London School of Economics. He's visiting us from 5 hours in the future. It's always reassuring to know that the future exists. So Andy studies tax law and tax avoidance with a growing focus on the sociology of elites. The research he's presenting today is part of a series of papers using big data from British tax returns to understand the economic elite in the UK. Teaches a number of courses at LSE on the taxation of wealth, and he serves on advisory boards both to the British government and nonprofit foundations focusing on tax reform. So, you know, he's a real world guy. He does really interesting work, and I'm delighted he was able to join us. So without further ado, please welcome Andy Summers.
Great, thanks so much for having me, Chris. Could you just remind me how long have I got and with questions as we go along, or at the end? I don't mind either way.
Sure, yeah. I think we're going to go for typically have a presentation for about 45 minutes, and leave maybe about 25 minutes for Q&A. And you know, I think in this format it's probably better if people hold their questions for the end, unless there's, you know, clarification questions that are real stumbling blocks. Sure.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. So first thing I should just say about this work is and I'm obliged to say this, it contains results that are obtained from UK tax data, and the UK Tax Authority HMRC requests that we let you know that although they've gladly provided us with access to these data, they don't sort of formally endorse our interpretation of the analyses. So the main question that I want to ask today and let you know about this project is, so how global are the UK's economic elite, and what drives some of the world's economic elite to the UK? So what I'm showing you here on the slide is some pictures of the top 10 wealthiest individuals in the UK as measured by the Sunday Times Rich List, and that's essentially the UK equivalent of the kind of Forbes list. They use various data sources, and I'll explain a bit more about what those are later on in the presentation, to try and figure out who are the wealthiest individuals connected with the UK. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be currently resident in the UK, but they have to have some substantial connection to the UK in order to make it be eligible for this list. And so a kind of striking fact about the most recent edition of the Sunday Times Rich List is that out of the top 10 wealthiest individuals in the UK, all but one of them have some substantial connection abroad. And that in various cases could be either that they are themselves currently resident abroad. So they may have made their wealth in the UK, maybe grew up in the UK, but have subsequently moved elsewhere. Or conversely, that they have come from abroad and they're now resident in the UK, but they have historic ties somewhere else. So looking down this list, just for example, the person who comes top, Sir James Dyson. I don't know if Dyson sells vacuum cleaners in the US, but that's his main thing. Various vacuum cleaners and any other sucking and blowing devices, various things. He was UK based originally, but has now, in quite a high profile move, relocated the Dyson headquarters and his own residence to Singapore. Looking further down the list, we have some individuals who originated from India, born in India and grew up in the UK. That applies to both the Hindujas and the Reuben brothers, and you'll see spattered through this list are a number of individuals originally from Russia, So Jim Radcliffe there at number 5, another like James Dyson, was based in the UK, but now is tax resident in Monaco. And there was quite a large media furore around that when he sort of publicly left the UK to relocate to Monaco. And so, as I said, actually looking here at the top 12, the only one of these who is sort of wholly UK based was the relatively young person in the list here, who is the heir to the fortune of the Duke of Westminster's estate, which owns very large amounts of land across London and the rest of the UK. And they're one of the kind of old aristocratic English families. They're the only ones who have no kind of notable foreign connection. So we might look at this and think, you know, that this is a sort of smoking gun of a really highly globalized economic elite in the UK. But obviously, we have to be a bit cautious about this in two respects. This is our top 10 from the Sunday Times rich list. These are the most high profile cases, and these are the ones that, you know, that appear frequently in the media and whose movements are particularly tracked. But there's a question about how deep this kind of global element goes. So how much is this picture representative of wider trends across the top of the distribution, or is this really just a phenomenon about the handful of people at the very, very top? And the second issue that we have kind of in answering that question is there's a real lack of reliable data available, at least up to now, that has allowed us to combine information on both people's income and wealth in order to identify them as potentially within the economic elite on one or other of those or both of those bases, and to combine that with information about their geographic origins and their kind of current connections. So some just selection here of existing work in this sort of space, and Cristobal's work actually, I must say, was one of the things that first got me interested in this kind of area. As Cristobal introduced, I am kind of by training an academic lawyer and interested in tax in particular from the perspective of how wealthy and top earning individuals arrange their tax affairs. And so a few years ago now, I invited Cristobal over to LSE to launch this fantastic book on millionaire migration, which of course he was using tax data, but to answer an important sociological question about the embeddedness of economic elites. And to some extent, this project is seeking to address some of the same kinds of questions in the UK context. And I'll explain in a moment why the UK might be a sort of important case to think about, and distinctive case potentially. But of course, there's a huge range of other work within sociology and other disciplines on this broad question of how globally connected or interconnected are those towards the top of the economic, so income and wealth distributions. Obviously, in the case of C. Wright Mills, talking in slightly different terms about a power elite, but nevertheless asking this question, to what extent are these formations ones that are kind of rooted in one location, and how much have broader connections between and across countries? So we study this question in the UK context, and there's a few reasons to think that the UK might be a fairly special case, or at least there are some distinctive features of the UK that might potentially have shaped the composition of the UK's economic elite, and might explain some of the forces of globalization that are at work here. So you know, towards our longer history as an imperial nation, as a colonial power, the UK and London in particular has kind of served as a node for global trade and capitalism, and some of that comes out in what I'll talk about later on, particularly in the context of this group known as the non-doms, individuals who are resident but not domiciled in the UK. That tax regime that I'll talk about actually has its roots very directly in colonial trade, and so we can see these. We can trace some of the UK's current status clearly a long way back. Somewhat more recently, under Margaret Thatcher, the 1980s, what's referred to as the Big Bang deregulation of financial and professional services that led to the kind of explosion of the City of London, has then laid the foundation for London's kind of preeminence as a world financial centre, and enhanced perhaps, although this has become a controversial talking point, the role of European integration in the success of the City of London in particular in attracting top earners and the wealthy. And I mentioned briefly the non-dom tax regime. We might think of that potentially as another driver of individuals to the UK. I'll explain later on in the presentation about what the non-dom regime involves and how foreign individuals can use this to their benefit, but it is effectively targeted at, although this wasn't its original intention, it's become renowned for providing very valuable tax breaks to foreigners who locate themselves in the UK. So the question here is sort of, can we see evidence of these forces in the in the way that the UK's economic elite is composed, and to what extent then is the UK potentially quite a distinctive case where this global element is particularly acute. So this project and what I'm presenting today is really very much an early work in progress. It's a product of an interdisciplinary collaboration between myself, I'm based in the LSE Law Department, with Mike Savage, who was director of the LSE International Inequalities Institute, a sociologist who I'm sure you all know. And Arun Advani, who is an assistant professor in economics at the University of Warwick. And we have teamed up to do this work because we think that trying to understand the behaviours and characteristics of those at the very top of the income distribution really does require input from these different disciplines, particularly given that we are, as I'll mention, working with the tax records of these individuals, and as well as what I'm going to show you today is mostly descriptive statistics, but we're also looking to analyze in causal terms some of the drivers of the behaviors of this group. So I think it's been a really fascinating project already, just working with and across these disciplines. But I would emphasize just for this presentation that it's what I'm going to show you is pretty early stuff, and it's potentially a very large project. So I'm really keen to get your input on where your ideas for where we might take this and your comments so far. This is not really a finished paper that I'm going to present to you today. So the way that we're approaching this question is to try and draw on some newly available data sources and to enhance these ourselves with linking data sources together. And so we've obtained access to administrative tax data from the UK Tax Authority that essentially comprises the full tax records of every taxpayer in the UK since 1997. So getting on for now a 25-year period, and we combine that with information from administrative data on on individuals' nationality and their migration status, and that's primarily what we're using to provide a window into this question of the globalization of economic elites. And I would say that's it's quite rare to have that information available. I mean, Cristobal did fantastic work using tax data on migration within the US. And one of the great strengths of that was the ability to observe within the US system where people had come from and where they were going to, which is very difficult enough even in the domestic context, but doing this for people's international origins and potentially destinations is rarely available information in administrative tax data, for the simple reason that typically it doesn't matter to your tax liability exactly which country you came from, and so that's not information that's routinely available in these data sets. So it's taken us a bit of work as a very first step to link other sources and obtain information about nationality and migration status, and that's primarily what we rely on here. Of course, one gap when we're thinking about this idea of economic elites is that what we observe from tax data is primarily based on people's taxable income. We do also observe their taxable capital gains, but what we don't observe directly from tax data is an individual's wealth, for the simple reason that the UK doesn't currently have anything like a wealth tax. And so for that purpose, we have looked to the Sunday Times Rich List, which, as I say, is this equivalent of the Forbes list. But in the UK, it actually covers the top 1,000 wealthiest individuals. I can explain a bit more about how the Sunday Times Rich List is compiled, but essentially it is one person's full-time job throughout the year to through various data sources, but essentially using manual methods, try to ascertain information about who are the richest people in the UK and how much money do they have. What we do is take that rich list and we combine it with other publicly available data sets. And the main one that I'll be showing you today is we've matched the Sunday Times Rich List with information from UK Companies House, which is the national administrative data source on company ownership and directorships. And that allows us to provide some more information about these individuals through their company filings. So our two main research questions are, firstly, how global are the UK's economic elite? And here we immediately kind of come across some definitional issues. This is a kind of descriptive, in principle, descriptive question that we're asking here, but nevertheless, there's obviously important choices to be made about how we define this concept of an economic elite. Here we're trying to look at both income and wealth, and we're focused broadly on the top of the distribution in the sense of the kind of the top 1% and above, narrower fractals above that. And also similarly, how to define and ascertain this idea of global connections. In the tax data, we can observe an individual's tax residence. We can also observe something, as I'll explain later on, known as their domicile. And so non-dom, that term I used earlier, is shorthand for not domiciled in the UK. And we can also look at their business connections through, for example, the Companies House data that I mentioned. And then the second question that that we're interested in is, insofar as the UK's economic elite is comprised of lots of individuals with global connections, what has driven the world's economic elite or foreign individuals to the UK? And so there's various ways that we could approach this question. One thing that I can show you today is just really in a descriptive sense, where are these individuals, which countries are these individuals coming from, or which are they located in, and which countries are they currently located in, and you know, what sorts of things are they doing in the UK? So are they employees, are they business owners, what sorts of industries do they work in? And that's going to give us a kind of first pass at the sorts of factors that look like they may be relevant to this sense of globalization. So just for example, the predominance of individuals working in the financial industry might point to the importance specifically of the City of London and the various regulatory changes in terms of the integration of the UK's financial markets globally, might give us a hypothesis really for some of the drivers of this this phenomenon. But then more precisely, we're also interested in approaching this from a causal perspective by exploiting various policy changes in both the UK's tax regime and in those that regulatory environment, try to exploit those quasi-experimentally to causally identify somewhat more precisely some of these drivers. And I think probably speaking as neither a outright sociologist nor an outright economist, I mean, I think that both of these strategies are going to provide us with important insights. And if we were to look only at the from a kind of searching for quasi-experimental variation, we would struggle to identify some of the broader trends that that we might sort of want to turn our attention to, even if we can't quantify them very precisely through some of this more descriptive work that I'm going to show you. So today, what I want to show you is sort of results from three somewhat separate but connected areas where we've done some initial work. And this is, as I said, very much a work in progress and not something that we're ready to draw strong conclusions from at the moment. But we're looking at these three groups predominantly. So the first is looking at those who are at the top on the basis of their reported taxable income. So top earners in the UK, broadly speaking, the top 1%, and as I say, we look at the top 0.1 and 0.01% more specifically as well. We then also look at the super wealthy in the UK, and here we're relying on the Sunday Times rich list entries and linked data. And then third of all, we have this group, the non-doms, who are a particular subset of tax filers who seek to take advantage of the special tax regime for foreigners and comprise sort of both top earners and individuals who are very wealthy but don't report very much taxable income. So this is, we can think of this as a group that comprises it's sort of selected on the basis that these individuals have some global connection that allows them to claim non-dom status, but it's a mix of people who are of this elite status on the basis of their income and or their wealth. So first of all, looking at these top earners, what I'm going to show you actually comes from some work that I did with Aaron Advani and two other colleagues, Felix Koenig and Lorenzo Pacina. This is a paper that is available in working paper form. You can find it on Aaron's website, aaronadvani.com. You can find a version of this paper. So here we use this administrative data that I mentioned, covering the entire taxpayer population. And the way that we obtain the information on migrant status that I mentioned earlier is by using individual's national insurance number, which is the equivalent of their US Social Security number, the first two letters of the national insurance number effectively map on to a date range in which the Social Security number was issued. And so, given that everyone in the UK who grew up in the UK is automatically issued with a Social Security number at age 16, we can identify people who were issued a Social Security number at a later age, and that marks them out as having arrived in the UK at some point after 16. We essentially, on this basis, define migrants as an individual who arrived in the UK after the age of 18. So we allow some gap just for some of those UK natives who receive a registration slightly late. This provides then for everyone in the whole taxpayer population, not only those at the top, but through the whole distribution, information on whether they are a migrant or otherwise defined as a native. And so what we observe here is quite striking, because in the UK, and in common with no doubt many other countries, debates about migration often focus on what's happening at the bottom. So low wage migration and questions about whether this is displacing jobs for natives and so on. And what's quite often missed is the level of this is not migration in the sense of people frequently moving, but people who have arrived from abroad at the top. And the reason why this has been missed in the UK context previously is partly because using survey data, like the UK's labour force survey, which is the main statistical information that's used in this context, just doesn't capture those individuals with top incomes, and the samples are not large enough to look at this question in detail. But what we observe here is that while the proportion of migrants is higher at the bottom than in the middle, what's most striking is what's happening on the right-hand side here, with this increase in the share of migrants in the top 1%. And if we zoom in some more here, we can see that this becomes more extreme at the very, very top quantiles. So looking at just the top 0.01%, over a third of individuals in the ranked by their income originally come from abroad, and so that's more than double the rate anywhere outside the top 1%. And what we also do is track this over time and show that this share of migrants in the top 1% has been increasing over time. And so the left graph here is showing you the share of individuals in the top 1%, 0.1%, 0.01%, and 0.001% who are migrants. And we can see quite a distinctive increase through the early 2000s in particular. And what we show in this paper, I'm not going to go through in detail today, is that this actually changes. This is quantitatively large enough to change our understanding of the trends in top income shares in the UK, in that quite a large proportion of, in fact, most of the increase in the observed, so measured top 1% share increase, can be attributed to the incomes of these migrants coming into the UK. And then just looking at the industries that these individuals work in, here this is ranked according to so taking all of the top 1% migrants, which industries do they work in? the largest industry here may not surprise people too much, as being banks. And if you look further down, there a lot of the others are sort of services ancillary to banking and finance. But also when we're looking at the top 1%, actually hospitals comes very high. So in the UK, you can make it into the top 1% as a top consultant level doctor. And so they're quite heavily represented, and other skilled professional services as well. So that gives us some idea of just the scale and trends in the importance of migrants at the top of the income distribution. But as I said, what it doesn't really show us is in relation to the super wealthy in particular. I mean, one difficulty is that we're relying on reported taxable income, and it's kind of well known that a lot of the wealthiest individuals are able to report relatively little taxable income compared with their wealth. So we wouldn't necessarily want to assume that the very top measured by taxable income are the very wealthiest individuals. These might be different groups. And so what we do here is turn to the Sunday Times Rich List as a data source. This, as I said, measures the wealth of the top richest people in the UK, counting the top 1,000 people or families. So actually one entry could comprise more than one individual, because they list some families, and where they've done that in the analysis that I'm going to show you, we assume an equal split amongst the individuals within the entry. And so of course, the big constraint for the Sunday Times Rich List, the same as the Forbes list, is that it's relying on publicly available information, and so effectively it's mostly based on these individuals' business wealth and an estimate of the value of their listed or unlisted businesses. It's not a reliable window into the amount of money that's in an individual's bank account, unless they voluntarily disclose that to the compiler of the Rich List, which apparently actually around a third of individuals do cooperate with the compilation of the Rich List in some way or other. Probably they want to make sure that if they're going to be in the list, then they are appropriately recognized for their wealth. And I've spoken directly with the compiler of the Rich List, Robert Watts, and there's some that essentially they then have to provide some evidence from their accountant that they are actually good for the amount of money that they claim that they are, and then that can be included in the list. So it's a mixture of publicly available information and private cooperation. Now, individuals can be in this list not only on the basis that they are currently living in the UK, but really in a more nebulous way on the basis that they have some strong connection to the UK, and that might be through a large UK business, or it might be through their kind of historic ties to the UK, and so on. So it encompasses already some individuals who are not living in the UK, but who have a UK element to their sphere of influence. So just showing you here the breakdown in terms of amount of wealth, just to kind of fix our ideas a bit on how wealthy these individuals are. To make it into the top decile of the Rich List, so basically the top 100 entries, the median wealth of those in that group is somewhere just around £2.5 billion, so probably 3 to 3.5 billion US dollars. The mean wealth is obviously higher than that because the distribution is skewed towards those at the very top of the distribution. In the UK, the UK's richest individual typically has between 15 and 20 billion pounds, which pales in significance compared with some of those who make it to the top of the US list. So we're not talking about kind of Jeff Bezos wealth here, but Nevertheless, there are around 150 billionaires in the Sunday Times rich list, connected with the UK. So actually, in a global sense, the UK has quite a lot of billionaires per head of population. So the way that we go about identifying global connections of these individuals, it's not routinely reported in the Sunday Times rich list itself, so we have to use a different data source for this and link the records. And so, as I mentioned, we use Companies House, which is an administrative data source on company owners and directors. And any director or major shareholder of a UK company is required to report to Companies House their nationality and their country of residence. Now, here, country of residence doesn't necessarily mean tax residence. So we shouldn't expect this to line up perfectly with what we would see in tax records if we were able to link them. But it gives an indication of where someone considers themselves to be based currently, and nationality gives us an indication of where they are from in some sense. So we match these together, and we get once we start with an automated method, and then the numbers are just about manageable for us to fill out the missing ones by looking at the records manually, and for some where information was missing, we used other sources like the Forbes 400. And after all of that, we get a pretty good match rate across these data sources, over 90% for both residence and nationality. And so this gives us an interesting window into the top 1,000 wealthiest individuals. And what's quite striking about this, if we break this down into whether an individual has foreign residence only, whether they're foreign national only, or whether they're foreign resident and foreign national. And if we take all three of these kind of collectively as indicating that an individual has some foreign connection, we can see that amongst the billionaires in the UK, this is quite high. Almost half of the billionaires listed in the Sunday Times rich list have some foreign connection, either in terms of where they've come from or where they are currently living. And I think what's particularly striking about this, thinking back to Cristobal's book, is, I mean, Cristobal did a similar exercise looking at the US billionaires and finding I think a much lower level of foreign connection. What we haven't done yet is looked at the question that Cristobal does about whether these individuals moved to the UK after they were rich or only originally. But I think it's an open question that we'd like to explore further about whether the UK is a kind of distinctive case of having a more globally connected super rich than other countries, or whether this is reflective elsewhere. But lower down the list, those shares are much lower. And of course, although this is split into 4 bins by wealth range, most of the top 1,000 in the rich list are actually in that left-hand bin of less than 100 million. I think to get into the rich list, you need about 70 million. So, but there's a large number of individuals between 70 and 100 million. And so it's not true to say that across the whole of the rich list that the foreign connections are as strong. And so, we can go back to this question that or the slide that I motivated this talk with initially, about 9 out of 10 of the top 10 have some foreign connection. We can see that across all billionaires, that's about half, but across the rich list as a whole, it's substantially less than that, although still significant. So if we look then at where these people are resident, we can see a kind of domination of residents in Europe and the ex-British Empire. nations. So the colonial connection that I mentioned, ex-British Empire and ex-Dominion, which was the essentially the direct rule by the UK of other countries during its colonial history. These are the main areas, rather than, for example, the US-based individuals in the UK rich list are relatively few, even amongst the billionaires. Something else that's quite interesting in going to this question of drivers of globalization amongst economic elites is the question of the relevance of tax. And here we've just grouped together the individuals who are listed in the rich list, but who declare in their company filing. And as I say, this doesn't necessarily correspond exactly with their UK tax status, but that they declare in their company filing that they are resident in a low tax jurisdiction, which we define here as just a country which levies zero income tax. Again, we see this sort of gradation where amongst the billionaires listed in the Sunday Times rich list, it's much more likely that those individuals are resident in a zero income tax jurisdiction. Not with, and the reason here, of course, that you might be featuring in the UK list, even though you're resident elsewhere, is because you've retained some business interests in the UK, or because you were in the recent past UK based. So like James Dyson or Jim Radcliffe that I mentioned at the start of the presentation. So those questions about where people are resident now, there's also, I think, an interesting question about where people have come from. And here again, it's the origins of those in the rich list are dominated by European and again UK ex-Dominion countries. So in the final bit of work that or the final sort of branch of this ongoing project, I want to look specifically at the question of non-doms. And so just to explain to you, first of all, what a non-dom is, this is defined as an individual who's resident but not domiciled in the UK. And so the issue of residence is essentially, for tax purposes, a question of where you're living now. So whether you're tax resident in the UK depends on how many days you spend in the UK, plus other ties. For example, do you have a home in the UK? Where do you work? Where are the rest of your family located? But then separately, the question of domicile is a much more nebulous question of where do you consider to be your permanent home. That's the root test of domicile as a legal tax concept, and that could be distinct from where your nationality, although it will often align with that, and distinct also from your residence or citizenship. It's a question, as I say, of where you intend to have your permanent home. And so a non-dom is essentially someone who lives in the UK but claims on their tax return, by virtue of having claimed non-dom status, that they are only in some sense weakly tied to the UK, because actually they have stronger connections ultimately to somewhere else. And there's two big advantages of claiming non-dom status on your tax return. So the reason why you would do this is because if you're a non-dom, you're able to pay no income tax or capital gains tax on the returns on any assets that are held abroad. So whereas most UK residents pay tax on their worldwide income and gains, non-doms effectively only pay tax on their UK source income and gains. So if you were employed in the UK, you would still have to pay tax on your UK earnings. But if you owned shares in a foreign company or property abroad, then any income that you receive from that would not be taxable. in the UK, and may well not be taxable in the other country either, because in the other country you will file that you're not resident there, you're resident in the UK. So you may well pay tax nowhere in the world on that income. And then the other main advantage is that you don't pay any inheritance tax. In effect, you don't pay any inheritance tax even on your UK assets, and apart from the house that you live in and any other property that you own in the UK. Whereas other UK residents will typically have to pay inheritance tax on their worldwide wealth. So it's a major tax advantage, but one that's only available if you can claim that although you're living in the UK, your permanent home is abroad. And here's the way that we identify this is from the declaration on the tax return. And according to that data source, around 0.1% of the UK population claim non-dom status. So it's about 50,000 individuals. It's not a huge number of people in absolute terms, and it's remained relatively stable over time, which is what this graph is showing you. But that group of 50,000 individuals are very highly concentrated at the top of the income distribution. So this is showing you the share of non-doms amongst top earners according to the amount of income that they report on their tax return. And so in the group of those who report income of between 100 and 200,000 pounds, the share of non-doms in that group is somewhat less than 3%. By the time you get to individuals reporting income over 5 million, actually that's over 3 in 10 of those individuals are claiming non-dom status. And there's two things going on here. I don't actually have the graph here to show you this, but there are effectively two factors that are leading to this increased concentration. One is what I showed you earlier on, that as your reported taxable income increases, it's more likely that you're a migrant in the first place, and being a migrant to the UK is your kind of gateway into being able to claim non-dom status. But something else that we found quite striking, as I say, I don't have the graph to show you here, but we also find that your chance of your propensity to claim non-dom status conditional on being a migrant also increases significantly with income. So you're basically more likely to make use of this particular tax regime as your income increases. So we can look here at the nationalities of these individuals. We obtained this information from a different administrative data source that we linked in, that's based on when somebody first arrives in the UK and applies for their social security number, they're required to go to an interview in person and prove show their passport and prove their nationality. And so we use that data to look at where these individuals came from and various snapshots in time over the past 20 years, how this has changed. So here amongst non-doms, we find that the United States is quite strongly represented. The other main countries are again those from Europe and those with a colonial connection to the UK. The US has been kind of persistently high throughout this period. What's quite interesting is we observe a really precipitous decline in non-doms from Japan over this time period, and a very large rise from a relatively small starting point of the number of non-doms from India and China. Then there's more stability, broadly speaking, in the other countries. But we can see rises in Europe and more of a sort of rise and then fall of some Commonwealth countries like Australia, Canada, South Africa.
Andy,
yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in with a quick question? Howard Aldrich asked this, and the moment he said it, I'm like, yeah, of course, that's what's missing. Where is Russia in this? It's such a sense that there's so many Russian billionaires.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So I think that one difficulty and something that's, I think, really interesting about the and challenging for us about this work with non-doms is it's obviously an administrative classification first and foremost, and it depends on you being classified as UK tax resident, but also UK tax non-domiciled. And so here I'm only showing you the individuals who are tax resident but non-domiciled in the UK. What I suspect is going on, but we can't. We're trying to get more of a handle on this with other data sources, but it's difficult, is that it may well be that those Russians, for example, the ones, I think there are about 4 out of the top 10 on the Sunday Times rich list who are from Russia. And likewise, you can tell the same sort of impression about the Middle East as well. If you go to if you hang out outside Harrods, which is the most sort of well-to-do department store in London, you'll see lots of people going in and out that may not actually be classified as tax resident in the UK. So it might be that those Russian billionaires have a house in the UK, but they spend sufficient time elsewhere that they don't appear as tax residents. We do also have information on non-residents who have some UK tax liability. And so another sort of step, another thing we're going to do as part of the project is to look at those non-residents specifically. And we might pick up more Russians amongst the non-tax residents than we do these resident non-doms. So what's quite striking about the resident non-dom group is that for tax purposes, you would be allowed to spend 365 days a year in the UK and still claim non-dom status. So you can be a non-dom set on the basis that, well, I'm living full time in the UK now. You might even have been here for every day for the past 10 years. But if you can still plausibly claim that ultimately you're planning to go back to your, in quotes, home country, then you can benefit from this special status. So I think that's likely what's going on here, but we need to dig into that a bit more. Yeah.
Thank you.
So here we're just indexing the numbers from each country to 2001 and showing you this really dramatic rise in China and India and the fall in Japan on the yellow line. And we can do this for smaller numbers for other groups as well. So going to this question of sort of drivers and amongst this group and what are they doing? Actually, most of those who file non-dom in the UK are actually receiving most of their income from employment. Now, to some extent, this is kind of by construction because we don't observe all of their foreign income because that's the benefit of the non-dom regime and they're not required to report the foreign income that's not taxable, and that's most likely to come from investment. So almost kind of as a residuary, it's likely that most of this is proportionally most of their income is from employment. But what's kind of more striking is that a large number of non-doms are reporting huge amounts of employment income. So they may be getting even more in investment income as well, but they are clearly employees in the main. And so when we look at this by an individual's main income source, about 80% of non-doms are receiving most of their taxable income from employment. Although having said that, there is a rise in the number of those who are both whose main income source is investment, and here this is effectively implies UK investment income because their foreign investment income wouldn't be visible to us. And also, I think kind of most interestingly in some ways, this grey line shows you people who report zero taxable income in the UK. So they're claiming non-dom status, but not reporting any taxable income. And nevertheless, it's likely that they have substantial income because there are various costs to claiming the non-dom status. So once you've been in the UK a certain number of years, you have to pay a fixed charge to access the non-dom status, which is either £30,000 or £60,000. It's likely that many of these individuals who are reporting zero income, it's not that they actually have no income, it's that they have no taxable income in the UK because all their income is received abroad. Something that's maybe surprised us slightly about the non-dom group is that there was somewhat more diversity in the industries that they worked in than we were necessarily expecting. There's quite a strong representation of financial services, but there's actually quite a lot in sort of more manufacturing-based services and other kind of high-skilled professional services and arts and sport as well. And then just finally, something else that we're interested in is sort of trying to range all the way from the global question of where people have come from down to sort of local clusters of individuals, and we've using the address, the home address reported for tax purposes, we can look at where these non-doms are based within the UK. They're very heavily concentrated in London. That might not be surprising, and within London they're incredibly concentrated. So this is actually looking at just the area of central London and where non-doms are based, and essentially those of you who visited London before, you might have been to sort of Hyde Park and the area of West London around Mayfair and where all the embassies are. That's essentially what you're seeing here in pink. And so actually, you know, people's the sort of popular imagination of West London billionaires living on the edge of Hyde Park is quite well captured in the data that we have here from tax returns. To say, probably most striking is that this area of Knightsbridge and Belgravia, which is the most, in terms of property prices, the most expensive part of the entire UK, has a density of non-doms that is over 10%. So over 1 in 10 of all taxpayers from this area are claiming the non-dom status, which, when you think that non-doms make up 0.1% of the UK's total population, is a really striking excess concentration. So those are just some of our initial findings, really. And as I say, we don't have a big sort of narrative to attach to this yet, or very conclusive lessons to learn, but it's an early piece of work, and so these are really just things that I'm thinking about at the moment, or we're thinking about as a team, and that I'd be very kind of grateful for any thoughts on from you. Broken down into kind of some challenges of concepts and definitions here about how we go about defining an economic elite and what it means to be globally connected, both as a conceptual question, in which I know there's a sort of pretty large literature already, but also, you know, in conjunction with what data we practically have available to us to observe characteristics of these groups. And then also kind of just what you think about this category of non-doms, because they're, in the one sense, as I said to Christabel earlier, they are a kind of administrative category. You know, you have a choice about whether you tick this box or not, and that's partly or largely depends on whether it's tax advantageous to you or not. But the term non-dom and the idea of a non-dom has actually sort of bled out into being something that's important sort of in popular cultural discourse around economic elites. And it's effectively, you see it used in UK tabloids as kind of the byword for someone who is rich and living in the UK, but only kind of weakly connected to the UK, and in some sense transient and fleeting in their sort of presence. So I think that's quite an interesting idea, but it's a question of how we sort of deal with that in our analysis. I'll leave the rest just on screen and maybe open up for questions.
I have a question, and a point that it seems to me that, again, I wrote a note to Cristobal and I said, my guess is that the sun never sets for the British global elite. And I think that you did establish that very clearly. But the non-dom category is quite, as you point out, it is also partly a product of tax system, but it's also partly a phenomenon which has been called transnational immigrants, people who easily move back and forth between, say, London and India, or Mumbai, or London and Shanghai, or London and Hong Kong, and they are transnationals. And the person who's written the most about this is Alejandro Cortes, and you might look into that, because it is a lifestyle as well as a product of rational reduction of tax, like urban. And the lifestyle part of it, it does lead to important other secondary questions, which would be, where do they make their wealth in their home country, and where do they invest their wealth? Because it could well be that they invest their wealth in real estate in London and the stock market, but they make their wealth in Mumbai or in firms that they have established. And again, these are questions that you can turn around the concept of transnationalism. That is, that you have immigrants who are transnational, who travel back and forth and send remittances back and forth, are seasonal migrants between Mexico and San Francisco. But the super rich are a transnational group that provide a channel for the flow of wealth and information, and investment wealth especially. And another person who writes about this is Annalise Saxenian in her book on the new Argonauts, pointing to the role of transnationals in the building of technology economies in India and in Taiwan and Shanghai.
Great.
But an excellent talk. I enjoyed it.
Thanks very much. No, that's really helpful. I mean, I think yeah, we definitely there's so many sorts of strands of debate that we could link this work into, and I think we're still feeling out which are the sort of fruitful lines of inquiry on that, and that's really helpful input.
Question from Michael.
Yes, thanks, Andy, for a very interesting talk. I'm sort of in a similar situation because I live in Canada but work in the US, and I negotiate with the tax revenue people in revenue departments of both those countries. But my question is sort of intended to stir up a fight between you and Cristobal as to who, whose conclusions generalize more readily. So the 2 points to ask about in terms of that. First, I look at your rich list, and by American standards, I mean, these people are relatively impoverished. I mean, poor James Dyson, I doubt he could get invited to a garden party in the Hamptons. He's 414th in the world in economic. So when you select on the UK's richest, they're the richest by UK standards, but really, how rich are they? And so maybe there's a difference between the US and UK in that area. The second is tax law. So as I quickly discovered, US tax law is very peculiar when it comes to where you live, because you owe taxes to the US until you renounce your passport. And so moving to Canada does nothing for your US tax status. Whereas for all the other countries in the world that I know of, and I don't know them all, I expect you and maybe Wes and some others know this a lot better than I do, but yeah, I think the US is sort of an outlier in that rule, because most countries do it the way you said in your talk. So my question is, which study should we should we generalize, from which of these two studies, if either, or maybe both, can we generalize to the broader pattern of tax citizenship?
Yeah, great. Shall I answer that, and then Cristobal can give his? I mean, I think
you're probably the one that's more generalizable, but go ahead.
So I think a crucial piece of information about someone's responsiveness to the tax system. There's been lots of various studies besides Cristobal's that have looked at tax responsiveness to migration, and I would say broadly there's not that much that they agree on, and there's quite a range of estimates. But one thing that does seem to come out is that you are more responsive to taxes if you're already a migrant, so conditional on kind of already having moved and already having some foreign connection. You are more mobile going forwards in response to tax changes. And in the US, amongst top earners, it's so heavily dominated by people who are natives and have no foreign connection that would quite readily, in the context of and in the context of Cristobal's work, I guess people who are from the states that they have long embedded connections to the state that they are currently in, that sort of dominates any mobility that you might find from people who are do have foreign connections. In the UK, I guess there may be a ton of reasons why we have more foreigners that are not tax related reasons, but given that we have a lot more foreigners at the top, it may be that because they already have experience of moving and they already have somewhere else that they're familiar with, they might then going forwards be more responsive to the tax system. So I mean that's an idea that we're kind of exploring. I guess another is just again a question of which population we're looking at exactly. So I mean I think it was evident from the even within the top 1,000 the rich list that I showed you, that the billionaires were much more likely to have foreign connections than the rest of the rich list. And I take your point that they're not that in global terms they're only sort of mini billionaires, but the people at the bottom end of that list are much more having tens or low hundreds of millions. I mean still puts you well within the top 0.001%, but seems to be in the UK at least somewhat distinct category from the billionaires in having much less in the way of foreign connections. So it probably depends. You know, Christabel was still looking, I think, at a fairly large group, and it may be that it's only when you get to the really, really pointy end that you might see these effects. But I don't know. Christabel can give his view.
Oh, I would just add that I'm not going to get into a food fight with Andy, despite Michael's encouragement. But I will just point out that, you know, Andy's data showed that, you know, only 10% of the UK billionaires, let me know if I'm getting this right, we're living in one of these offshore tax havens. And that's about pretty consistent with what I've reported before from the Forbes World Billionaire list, that about 80 to 85% of British-born billionaires live in the UK. And so, you know, I'm not sure if this disagrees with my findings. What he's showing is that, you know, the UK sells tax shelter to world rich people. And I'll swing back. And so, you know, what we see is that, you know, there's a lot of people who are rich and who are living in London, but not really paying taxes there. And, you know, that's because, you know, the UK is a tax haven for non-British born people. And I'm going to loop back to a question about why that's the case, but I want to hear, I know Wesley's had a question, so I wanted to let him go first before we dive into that.
Thanks. Yeah. So, you know, my question is really to both of you, and that is, what are the social forces that in today's world shape where the global elites spend their time? You know, you hear stories about, oh, the narcos in Latin America are looking for a safe place to live, so they go to London, or the Russian mobsters go to London to escape their own government. Is that really a driving force, or do we still really live in a world where it's the institution of family that drives where these elite live, not the government institution saying this is where you will pay the least amount of tax? It is maybe their embedded social connections that really drive where they live and spend their money. That's my question.
Yeah. That's a fascinating way of breaking up the drivers, actually, and I mean, I think in the UK we haven't done anything yet to sort of quantify the magnitude of these, but I think it probably is a bit of both, in that for example, it's patent from the legal records. You can pull up quite a lot of London's also a centre for litigation amongst these Russian oligarchs, for example. They do a lot of their suing each other and foreigners in London, and some of these cases make pretty fascinating reading, actually. So there's a major case between Boris Berezovsky and Roman Abramovich. Roman Abramovich is the Russian oligarch who owns Chelsea Football Club, and Boris Berezovsky, I think, was found dead in his bathtub in slightly suspicious circumstances, unconnected to this litigation, I should hasten to add, but in case anyone thinks I'm accusing Roman Abramovich or something. But the sort of UK legal system and security of property in a way that you know, can be read, I think, quite fairly as the UK institutions also turning a blind eye to some of the sources of the wealth that ends up in London, probably is one institutional factor, potentially alongside the tax system. The sort of non-governmental factors, I mean, one that the UK sells heavily related to family is its private school system. And I think it would be interesting to look more at the sort of national origins of pupils in the UK's elite schools, because I think that anecdotally that's an important driver for why people might want to locate themselves in the UK. They can sort of make themselves safe in terms of their assets, and they can also sort of ensure security for their children's educational prospects as well. So it may be a kind of confluence of some of these things, I suspect. But yeah, that's a really interesting way of dividing it up. Is it the government, or is it sort of other, yeah, cultural and private factors?
I'll just briefly add, in my tax data, we do have a lot of details about, well, basic details about family structure. Do they have children at home? Are they married? Are they a dual earner couple, or are they a primary breadwinner couple? And all of these are things that really tie people to a place. So if you just look at, migration rates, willingness to move across states in the US, once people are married, once people have kids, their migration rates just plummet. They drop by. Each of those factors reduces millionaires, $1 million income earners, migration rates by half. So, I do see in my data, there are some millionaires who are essentially unattached individuals who don't have kids, aren't married, are relatively young. There's, the odd Facebook guy like Eduardo Saverin, is an example of this. But, and these people are quite mobile. They have very high migration rates. But, like 90% of millionaires are sort of like, are married, they're almost all married. Marriage is one of these things where there's been declining marriage rates in the US for generations, but not for rich people, and this is one of the things that pushes back against what would otherwise make them more mobile. But I agree, it's a great question. I remember that Nathan had his hand up. Nathan, did you still want to ask a question?
No, sorry, I figured it out after.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for the great talk, though. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, Wesley, then, do we answer your question very well?
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you. I mean, it surprises me to some extent, but yeah, you provided a lot of insight. I appreciate your talk. And, these are super interesting questions I don't think about very often. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Well, then, and if you don't mind, I'll circle back to this question that, what does the UK specifically get out of being a tax haven for foreign nationals? If we look around the world and you had a list of the main sort of international tax havens, they're typically like tiny little countries that don't really have much of an economy otherwise. They're not really doing very much. They get a very large portion of their revenues from selling these services to a small number of very rich people. And it's unusual to see, like a big modern developed economy doing this. Switzerland does it as well. But what does the UK get out of having a bunch of wealthy foreigners that aren't really paying taxes in the country, or paying very little?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, in pure policy terms on the non-dom regime, quite understandably, that question sort of entails a presupposition that this policy was designed for the purpose of attracting foreigners and foreign investment to the UK. And that's actually not historically the way the non-dom regime developed at all. I mean, I alluded to this briefly earlier, but its origins are as old as the income tax in the UK. So basically the very late 18th century. And the basis for it originally was that you had all of these people who were UK based, but had that were doing all of their trading in the colonies abroad, and they would amass large profits in the colonies, including on sort of slave plantations and in various industries in the West India Company and East India Company and so on. And those profits were not physically accessible in the UK until the goods were shipped in back to the UK. And so the historical origins of the non-dom regime was actually a concession to saying, if your income is abroad, you can't actually access it yet, and you only have to pay tax on it once it actually comes into the UK. That was the historical basis of the non-dom regime. And you can go, we have another kind of project sort of tracing the history of this, but essentially at every turn there have been efforts to curtail the scope of the policy, and they'd never come to anything. And so there's actually a kind of political economy question about how this institution, which wasn't originally intended to attract wealthy foreigners, it was a kind of relic of our colonial history, has been sort of defended and repurposed for this. And actually, the way the non-dom regime functions is not at all well suited to encouraging foreign investment. It's kind of the reverse, right? Because it actually encourages you, conditional on living in the UK, it encourages you to hold all your investments outside the UK in order to maximise the benefit of the tax exemption.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it sort of gets people to shovel their investments away from the UK. I mean, I'm shall we say, somewhat skeptical that the non-dom regime would actually stand up to a rigorous policy evaluation of its effects, and that is one of the things that we're trying to do. But the way it's defended in public is that, sort of largely ignoring this historical story, that it now functions to encourage wealthy people to locate in the UK, and that this has various largely non-specified benefits for investment in UK companies, and that these very rich people are, they're employing UK people, they're spending lots of money in Harrods, which is upping our VAT revenues and so on. But it's pretty hard to get at, in a robust way, what benefits are causally attributable to this policy. But that is something that we're interested in and working on. Is it actually driving any additional employment or investment and so on? My guess is probably not much, but yeah, to be investigated.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and you can point to consumption. The UK benefits from their consumption and some sales tax, but equally, there's got to be a widespread sense that it's driving up housing costs to be encouraging these foreign sort of tax cheats to buy expensive property in very specific places.
Yeah. And that's why it's such a site of public interest, and why, as I say, in one sense, non-doms are this really obscure administrative category. In another sense, I mean, it's probably not a term that anyone will have heard of outside the UK, but in the UK, most people wouldn't be able to give you the strict tax definition. But if you say what's a non-dom, they'll be able to say effectively, well, it's some shadowy foreign person who's rich and lives in the UK but doesn't really live here. That would be widespread sort of popular understanding. And yeah, that's why I find it a very interesting group.
Yeah, that's been so durable. Wesley, please jump in.
Yeah, last question. So of the British royal or the British elite, do you have any sense what percent derive their wealth from the market or entrepreneurial endeavors versus inheritance? I'm wondering about the
yeah, good question, and we're trying to do some more of that sort of analysis in the Sunday Times Rich List. We need to do it ourselves because the Sunday Times Rich List does publish sometimes lists about how many, in quotes, self-made millionaires and billionaires there are, but they take a much more restrictive liberal definition of self-made than perhaps we would. So people who start with only a few tens of millions from their father, but then go on to build a company of hundreds of millions are self-made, according to the Sunday Times. Whereas, it's harder to get a figure for how many people who's kind of started with nothing are featured in the Sunday Times Rich List. But if you look at the group whose wealth is composed kind of purely of inheritance, so really nothing that they have added value to them in their own generation, I think that is about 15% of the entrants of the Rich List, so top 1,000. To some extent, there is an issue here about the data source, and that by construction, the rich list is dominated by business owners, because it's the business visible wealth that is used mainly to compile the list. And there is a bit of a worry that there are aristocratic families with a lot of land holdings that are not well represented in the rich list, i.e. those individuals are missing. And so that's another thing that we're looking at, trying to pull in. Essentially, part of this project is going to be to try to the Sunday Times Rich List is a good resource. As I say, there's one individual working on it full time, but it's not particularly high tech in the way that it uses available data sources. And we're trying to kind of replicate and improve on and automate the Sunday Times Rich List as part of this project and build it out. And maybe we can actually then sort of road test it on the top 1,000, show how it matches up with the manual approach. But then if ideally then roll it out to beyond the top 1,000 and pull in more information. So that's another part of the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was impressed to see the data linkages that you guys are doing, connecting people on the rich list to ownership of public companies, such. It seems like, a great work to be doing, a lot of value added, and sounds like a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, any of this data linkage tends to be a fairly painstaking process, and with 1,000 people, it's just about possible to, as I say, to fill in some gaps manually. What we'd really like to be able to do is improve that to the point where we can roll it out to much larger numbers and go much deeper than the top 1,000 effectively, but using basically the same methodology. But yeah, that's another work in progress, really.
Did I understand correctly that you guys are linking the rich list to the tax returns?
We would love to do that, but we have not got permission. We haven't asked for permission because we don't think that we would get it yet to do that. That would be great. More really in the reverse, we're trying to use, we've got various strategies we're trying to employ to get a window onto the wealth of individuals in the tax returns, partly from capitalizing their investment income. We can link inheritance tax returns. We can also look at things like what we can get data on their main home and the value of their main home. So, for example, if you get a non-dom who's reporting zero taxable income, but they live in a house that costs £20 million, then that's a fairly good clue that they're not actually in poverty, so that we're trying to do what we can from that side of things. It'd be great to just directly link the tax records and the Sunday Times Rich List, but so far I don't think we are quite friendly enough with HMRC for them to let us do that.
Right. Okay, well, this has been really great, and it's impressive to see how much work you guys have done to bring to light this evidence and dealing with, one of these big things. The UK is one of these global cities, and really so important to understand it better, to get the broader lay of the land, as Michael was saying, and so forth. So, thanks for coming and sharing this with us today, and I look forward to seeing how the project continues to unfold. But yeah, thanks very much.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me and for all the questions. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right, take care. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Bye.
See you.